Welcome to the Hockey Podcast. I am Luke Lipinski.
And I am Doug Cannon.
This week's show, Patrice Bergeron just might be insane. Calgary won't win the Cup, but they could win the draft. And Daniel Alfredsson and Martin Brodeur are in the news because it's apparently 1995 again.
And we'll also be looking at Vegas' take on the 2014 Stanley Cup and the new hockey game. Where's Yakupov?
All that and more. Let's drop the puck on episode 12. All right, Doug, the Stanley Cup is officially in the books. Training camp opens in 2.5 months.
Yep.
The only good thing about the shortened season is the shortened off season.
Yeah, I guess that's the silver lining in the dark cloud, right?
I'm really looking for some silver linings right now. So, yes, Chicago Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup. It's a few days ago now, but we haven't spoken since then. Last time we talked on this podcast, they were up 3-2 in the series. They end up winning Game 6 in Boston in really pretty dramatic fashion. The Bruins, I don't want to say this was an epidemic for them all year, but more than you would expect with the Bruins. If you go back and look at their stats, they lost leads in the third period. It wasn't like more than 50%, but it was a lot more than you would expect for that team with that defense and that goaltending in the span of 17 seconds. They not only lead this game, and they look like they're going to Game 7. They end up giving up the lead and then losing.
Yeah, I mean, I had an odd perspective on everything because I'm watching the Game 6, and I'm like, great, we're going to have a Game 7. We're going to have a Game 7. Game 7 was going to fall on my birthday. And I had plans of buying a six-pack, sitting on the couch, and just getting into Game 7.
Not too much to ask.
And enjoying playoff hockey, and whoever won, won. I just wanted a Game 7.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe how Boston lost their sense of urgency in those last few seconds, last few minutes of the game. I mean, it was a great game up until that point.
Yeah, it was a very good game.
The
whole series was very good.
Fun to watch, and I'm like, where is that? I mean, don't you think at that point your sense of urgency is at its highest?
I don't know what happened because the Bruins all season and in the playoffs and really for the last few years never seemed to tighten up. Even when they were down heading into Game 6, they seemed loose. They were like, yeah, we'll win this. We're on home ice, whatever. Chicago scores the second goal of the game for them, so this is the goal to tie it. And I would say probably a good 2 or 3 seconds before they even scored, I looked at the people I was watching the game with, and I was like, they're going to score here because everything just kind of switched. They had it in the corner. They were moving right to the front of the net. Boston's defense broke down for one of the few times all season, and then they just lost composure, and 15 seconds later, Chicago had scored again. And it was just a weird play, throw it on goal. The difference is Boston had the lead with a minute and a half left, and Chicago was in Boston's zone. Then Chicago had the lead with a minute left, and Boston never even got a shot when they pulled their goalie.
I think we discussed it off, Mike, last week. In fact, it was you that brought it up. Chicago started to crash the net. They paid for it. Believe me, they paid for it, but they were going.
Dave, especially.
They were going down the middle more. They left the outside and were coming to the middle and using the middle of the ice. Whereas in the Pittsburgh series, everything got kept to the outside.
Rangers too, but you know what? Toronto attacked the net on Boston and probably should have beat them.
Right, and I'm thinking that, Chicago played Boston's game against Boston. Pressure, crash, and they just came at them, and and it worked. And, kudos to Joe Quenneville.
Yeah, he's a good coach. I mean, obviously, Claude Julien's a good coach too. Not the world's biggest Blackhawks fan, but it's tough to not be impressed by some of these shots of the parade where it just looks like every
citizen of Chicago, yeah.
So it's just great to see, and it's always great with the hockey writers making jokes about Vancouver in similar situations. But some interesting pictures out there of just Chicago just being packed. They love their Blackhawks. It was a great Stanley Cup, whether you're a Blackhawks fan or not. It was entertaining. Really, the whole playoffs this year were entertaining. We made the comment heading into the Final Four that it probably was the 4 best teams, and it's not normally the case. So now I guess you turn your attention to what's going to happen next year, and unfortunately Las Vegas, as always, is ahead of all of us. They already have the odds out for next year.
Of course they do.
So just very quickly, a couple teams at the top. I want to get your thoughts on these. And it doesn't really matter what the odds are, but I'm just going to give them to you for perspective. Just interesting to get a feel for what the so-called experts think will happen next year.
I'm going to put the brakes on you first.
Oh, I had so much momentum.
I know you did.
Okay.
But we forgot one thing about the Chicago-Boston series.
Okay.
A player by the name of Patrice Bergeron.
That's true. I think he's earned some
before
credit.
we move on to the 2014 Stanley Cup, I know we're a little anxious, but that guy needs a mention, at least.
Well, let's see. What were all the injuries? Okay. The hole in the lung.
Have you ever had a lung injury in your life?
I've had rib injuries where it's tough to breathe, but I don't think they've ever been a lung
I've had
injury.
a collapsed lung.
Oh, yeah. No, they shouldn't be collapsed.
And it is the most painful thing. It's unbelievable. So I don't know what a punctured lung's like, because obviously it stayed inflated.
Yeah.
And it's I can feel it now just talking about it.
See, now I wish I had his face-off numbers. I'll just put this out to you. I broke a couple ribs a year ago playing adult league hockey, not the NHL. But because of when the game was, and you know how it is with adult league hockey, you drive all the way to the arena, and then you get hurt 2 minutes in, you're going to keep playing because you drove all the way out there. So I was taking face-offs in that game. Every face-off hurts. Breathing hurts. He was playing with the punctured lung, the numerous rib injuries, a separated shoulder, torn muscles, and he was taking face-offs in the NHL in the Stanley Cup and winning them.
The guy's a beast. He's a beast.
He's insane. Like, he's crossed the line from beast to insane.
Kudos, man. That's all I got to say. I totally respect the dude.
That guy deserved to win the Stanley Cup.
Yes, he did.
And I tell you what, the other lasting image from that game, I know everybody's made this point, but Andrew Shaw getting hit in the face with the puck.
Right.
And then he keeps going out on the ice, and the ref's like, no, you're bleeding again. You have to go back to the bench. So, okay, stitch me back.
Same principle,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I want to play. I want my team to win.
It's what it takes to win the Stanley Cup. And I pointed out that night, if this was baseball, all these guys would be retiring. On the spot.
It's true.
So imagine Alex Rodriguez in that situation. He would be on the DL for years, collecting a lot more money than Andrew Shaw's getting. So that's the 2013 Stanley Cup. For what it was, pretty amazing.
Right.
Now, can we move on to next year?
Yes, we can.
So I can put the Blackhawks in the rearview mirror. The top 5 teams next year. If this wasn't a podcast, I'd make you do this Family Feud style, but I'm not going to put the listeners through that. The Penguins are favored at 5-1. Blackhawks number 2. St. Louis number 3. Boston number 4. Detroit number 5. Any problem with any of those?
Nope. Because I thought St. Louis was going to finish a lot stronger this year.
Okay. I don't get the St. Louis love every year. They are a better team than I probably think they are. They probably are better than that, but they don't ever win in the playoffs. So to pick them to win the Stanley Cup seems like a bit of a leap of faith to me.
I picked them in round 1.
And you were wrong. That was one of the few times you were wrong in the playoffs. You were 10-5 in the playoffs. I was 11-4. We should point that out.
They're a good team, man. They're a really good team. I don't know what it's going to take for that team to get over the hump, but I don't have a problem with them being the top 5 for next year.
Okay, but let me give you a couple teams behind them that I'm so much more comfortable picking to win the Stanley Cup. Not just to have a nice run through the playoffs. The Bruins, the Red Wings.
But that's the top 5, right?
Yeah, but I mean they're behind St. Louis.
Sure.
Maybe not the Canucks, depending what they do. Although it could be interesting with the Kings.
Well,
the Rangers.
I think when the odds makers sit down to do this, I mean, you look at Boston. There's going to be some changes there.
Yeah, Bergeron will be healed.
And Rask, they got to re-sign him. He was a key this year.
But they'll get him.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. But okay, so Boston, Red Wings, Canucks.
Yeah, they're kind of the same as St. Louis.
Kings, strong contender. Sharks. Yeah. Pretty much the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got all the returning playoff teams at the top.
Well, and you should. But, I mean, I like the Rangers with Alain Vigneault better than I think I like St. Louis. If I'm actually picking a champion next year, I don't think either one of them will win, but if I had to, I like Anaheim better. And I tell you what, I definitely like Ottawa better than Montreal, and for some reason Ottawa's way down this list. Again, I don't think they're going to win the Stanley Cup, but they've got arguably the best defenseman. They've got a very good goalie. They got the coach of the year, and they have a ton of money to spend.
You also have to put these teams in an 82-game season.
That's true. That is true.
You have to weigh that as well. Under a new system.
Yeah, there's a lot of new coaches on these. That's what's weird. These top teams, a lot of them have
new divisions, new playoff rules. I mean, there's a lot of factors here that didn't exist.
We can all agree Calgary at 100-1 should probably be 1,000,000-1. Like, think about it. If you put $1 on the Flames to win the Stanley Cup, and you're right, you should automatically be a millionaire. You should get prestige and fame. The Calgary Flames, this is my bold prediction for 2014. And I have nothing against the Flames. I hope they get back on track. They're rebuilding, which I think you have to do. My bold prediction is they don't win the Stanley Cup.
I don't think they're going to win the Stanley Cup either.
I feel pretty confident in that.
That's a pretty safe statement.
You're listening to The Hockey Podcast. Feel free to email comments or questions to the show at our email address, thehockeypodcast@gmail.com.
NHL Draft is tomorrow as we're recording this, so hopefully you get to hear this before the draft. Even if not, I mean, it's not like these guys are going to have played before you get to hear this. So here we go, Doug. Now 7 rounds, 210 picks. Let's do our mock draft. No?
Well, kind of, sort of.
Okay. Well, I think what we should do is maybe just look through the top 14 picks, because those are the 14 teams that didn't make the playoffs. So in theory, those are the teams that need to cash in. But a couple things about this draft. First of all, it's supposed to be the deepest draft since 2003.
That's what everybody says.
You look at the 2003 draft, 24 All-Stars in that draft. That's unreal.
That's incredible.
So
we were talking about it the other day.
Yeah.
It was like, oof.
It's just a laundry list of All-Stars.
Yeah, and a lot of those 24 All-Stars didn't go in the first round.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to the depth that year and the fact that I have not heard a scout this year say this draft isn't deep and just loaded.
Right, and they're talking past the first round. They're not talking just the first round picks. They're talking right through round 7.
Yeah. So rounds 2 and 3, your team has a pick there. It is definitely worth keeping an eye on. And you can kind of tell based on the fact that there's really kind of 5 players that stand out, it seems like, above the others. And there's not really a set order at the top of the draft. And when we touched on this last week, I think everybody has been saying Seth Jones would go number 1 for months and months and months. And now it looks like he's pretty much not going number 1.
Yeah, I mean, Central Scouting's top North American and top European skaters, they haven't changed in order. I mean, the rankings right now still have it Seth Jones, Nathan MacKinnon, Jonathan Drouin. They still have Alexander Barkov first on the European side. The thing that has changed a little bit is, the play of some of these players in the Memorial Cup.
That seems to be big, really.
Getting that last look at these guys.
Because they all went against each other.
Right.
That's why it's big this year.
And then the other thing was the news coming out of Colorado where they're going, we're not taking Seth Jones. And everybody's going, he's the number 1 pick, he's the number 1 pick, he's the number 1 pick. And then you got the Avalanche going, no, we don't want him.
Which, to me, is still a little strange. And I read up on this quite a bit this week because you and I looked at their defense off the air. And here's Colorado's defense. Eric Johnson, Jan Hayda, Greg Zanin, Ryan Wilson, Corey Sarich, Matt Hunwick.
Right. Johnson was the big one, and he didn't do much.
Yeah, he's a former number 1 pick, but, you need more than one defenseman. Not like those other guys are bad. And Colorado, I get, has a lot of needs, but Colorado has some forwards. They have Matt Duchene. They have Paul Stastny. They have P.A. Parento. If they keep all these guys, they have forwards. But they seem adamant, and the quote that kind of stood out to me that makes me now believe Joe Sakic was that the 3 forwards at the top of this draft are guys that you can't afford to pass on. And he's going to have to pass on 2 of them because he can only take 1. But it really seems like they just think Nathan MacKinnon is their guy.
Okay, and I said it last week, and I've said it in other shows. I've always been taught, I've always been told that when you build a team, you start from the net out.
Yeah, those are the teams that tend to have the most success.
So you go goalie, you go D, and then you go up the middle, and then your center, and then you do your wings. And so Seth Jones is not only a great defenseman, he puts up points.
We saw him play in the World Juniors.
Yep.
I've seen some of the film of him playing with Portland. We saw the Memorial Cup. And, again, he was on the ice when Nathan MacKinnon was scoring goals, so maybe that influenced some of this in the Memorial Cup. But by all accounts, he's supposed to be a game-changing defenseman. He's big. He's mobile. There's just not a lot of those guys available every year.
Well, I think you have to look at the big picture. You can't look at the whole of what can you do, what have you done for me lately? Because, Seth Jones had a tremendous regular season, and so he had a couple of bad games against Nathan MacKinnon. MacKinnon came hot at the right time. And I'll be honest with you, in watching the Memorial Cup, I was more impressed with Drouin.
Yeah, Drouin to me is the wild card. And we should say it's not even that Seth Jones had bad games. It's just his team got beaten by Nathan MacKinnon. But Jonathan Drouin was on McKinnon's team, which is probably a big reason why they won. And by all accounts, he's the most exciting player in this draft.
Every time he stepped on the ice, he was doing something.
So Yeah, he's supposed to be the fastest, best hands. I mean, just everything. So quickly going through these top picks, let's just give Colorado Nathan MacKinnon. I think we can agree Florida needs Seth Jones.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're Florida and Colorado does go with Nathan MacKinnon, you're going, woohoo, I'll take Seth Jones. Thank you very much.
Florida can't lose.
Nope.
I mean, until the season starts. Then they can lose frequently. But right now they can't lose. So then that leaves Tampa Bay with the very nice consolation prize of Jonathan Drouin, who could be the best player in this draft.
Right, and we'll get into this a little later. Tampa just bought out Vinny Lecavalier, so getting a nice high-scoring,
nice goal scorer,
would be a good fit.
Another short, fast playmaker who I guess, I mean, you want to learn from Martin St. Louis, that's about probably the perfect guy to learn from. So Jonathan Drouin, we have probably going 3. And then you have Alexander Barkov, I think, as the consensus to go to Nashville at 4.
Perfect fit for Nashville.
You know, Nashville makes the playoffs.
I'm going to interrupt you. Nashville would be very, very upset if Tampa took Barkov.
Yes, I agree.
Now, leaving Drouin there is not a bad consolation.
It's true. But
I think
a center.
Yes, I think Barkov would be a great fit for Nashville.
So, he's a 6'2" center. I mean, he's got some size. He can score. Nashville, to me, is the real winner here because this is a team that makes the playoffs every year. You've got Barry Trotz. You've got Pekka Rinne. You've still got Shea Weber. So that's a team that's going to be good again.
Right.
Then, kind of a sneaky move at the end of last year, they knew they weren't going to make it. They just kind of wrote it off. They were in a short season, whatever. We're not going to make it. So we'll flip Martin Erat to Washington. We'll get Philip Forsberg, another center, a lot of skill. There was thought going into the draft last year, I remember, that he might be the best player when all was said and done. So now you had him, and then you had Barkov.
Well, let's go back to what I said earlier. Start at the goalie. Goaltending's pretty good in Nashville right now.
Fine, yeah.
Defense is good.
Yeah.
And now we're going up the middle.
And I would make the case of those top 4 guys, the worst fit for Nashville is Seth Jones because they don't really need him.
I agree.
But even if they get him, then you have Seth Jones and Shea Weber back there.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad duo.
So I think Nashville is in a very good position here. I mean, obviously trades could happen and throw everything off, but I don't think Nashville's moving.
Right.
Number 5, Carolina. I mean,
Center.
This is where it gets a little, crazy. They could take Sean Monahan, who a lot of people seem to like. The one guy, I guess, to throw out here as the wild card is this Valery Nikushkin guy from Russia, who's another guy could be the best. There's those top 5 guys where it's any of those 5 guys could end up being the best, but you always have that problem with the KHL. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know if you're going to definitely get them.
But I think now you're looking at needs.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, I mean, I realize for some of these guys, they're not going to play right away. I mean, we have to always put it in perspective.
Top 4 will, though.
I think that Carolina would probably either go with Sean Monahan or Elias Lindholm.
Okay, so they want a center.
Right?
Yeah.
And Lindholm can play either wing or center. So I think the consensus is Sean Monahan, and I probably think that's where he's going to go.
And I think the last point on Nikushkin is there only seems to be certain teams that feel comfortable taking Russian players right now with that high of a pick.
Right.
And maybe Carolina could be one of those teams. So maybe he's worth watching there. But, yeah, Lindholm's another guy that's supposed to be a great, good two-way player. So, you figure, let's just say Monahan goes to Carolina. Maybe go Lindholm to Calgary.
Right, and Calgary could use a center.
Calgary could use a lot. So then you get to Edmonton at 7. And this, to me, is the only slam dunk. They have to take a defenseman.
Right, so the next best defenseman available is going to be Darnell Nurse.
Nephew of Donovan McNabb. Bet you didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Now you know that. His dad played in the CFL, so maybe you know who that is. I don't know. Mom played college basketball. Athletic defenseman who likes to fight. I mean, that's what Edmonton needs.
Great.
So a lot of the lists have Buffalo taking Nikushkin. If he goes earlier, they probably take Monahan.
Yeah. No, New Jersey likes Russians.
It's true. New Jersey, you look at their team, they can't field a full roster right now.
Right.
But a couple of the mocks I've seen, with New Jersey, it's interesting. They have them taking the only goalie that I've seen even rated in the top 2 rounds.
Yeah, Foucault.
But if you think about it, that's a lot higher than most scouting places have him rated. But both of New Jersey's goalies are over 40 years old. They need to draft a goalie at some point.
Yeah, and we'll get into this later, too. And it's like, because their one goalie's on the cover of EA Sports.
Yeah. EA Sports 2014.
But isn't it interesting that Foucault comes from the Moose, Halifax Memorial Cup winners?
That team
Got a lot of talent.
There's a lot of guys from Halifax, yeah. So up next is Dallas at 10.
The projected Alexander Winberg from Sweden. He's a center / winger. They need a forward.
They could go in. I mean, I've seen him with him. I've seen him with Rasmus Ristolainen, who's my favorite name in this draft. I just want to be announcing when he gets drafted. He's defense. I mean, Dallas could go any number of directions there. So once you get to this part, it's a little tough to project because you don't know who's off the board. But Philadelphia, by most accounts, I've seen them taking Nurse. If Edmonton passes, I've seen them taking Samuel Moore, and they're taking defense.
They're going D. I agree with that.
You have the Coyotes at 12, probably going forwards.
Yeah, I think that organization is set along the blue line, and they need a good, strong center down the road. So, yeah, I think they'll either a forward. I won't label it winger or center, but they need a good, strong forward.
Or like you said, too, build from the goaltending and the defense out. They've done that already.
They've done that.
So I've seen Curtis Lazar going there. I've seen Hunter Shinkaruk.
Yeah, Shinkaruk
going there. So they're probably going to go forward unless they trade. Winnipeg, Max Domi. I've seen his name a lot. He's interesting because it's Ty Domi's kid.
You know what? Forget his dad. You know, I'm one of those guys that, you know, it's great that he's there and his dad. I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. I'm from Toronto. I grew up watching Ty Domi play. But Max Domi's nothing like his dad, dude.
No, he scores and he's fast.
This kid can play. This kid can play. And Winnipeg would be very, very, very wise at that position to take him if he's still available.
It seems like they'll go forward because if it's not him, I've seen Bo Horvat a lot.
Okay.
So, again, another winger / center. But, yeah, Max Domi. You know, this brings me to a point that I've really noticed over the last few years. I don't know if it was always this way. Like Kirby Reichel's another guy, son of Warren Reichel. The NHL, more than any other sport, and maybe this just speaks to the, you know, if you play hockey a lot growing up, you have a huge advantage because you've got an ice rink or you're playing travel hockey or whatever. It just seems like there's a lot of bloodlines in the NHL that there aren't in other sports.
Well, not to get too far off, but because I'm involved in youth hockey a lot and I see it a lot, hockey's a very family sport. I mean, we're up at 5 a.m. We're kids. Mom and dad are always with the kids. And then you watch some of these NHL players. They bring their kids to every game. They're in the locker room. They're with their families, as much as they can.
Yeah.
So that doesn't surprise me.
And you're right. The early morning wake-up call to drive your kid to an ice rink, especially if you live somewhere cold. We at least live somewhere where it's nice in the morning.
Right.
You have to love hockey to be doing that. Otherwise, you're telling your kid, look, there's a basketball hoop down the street.
Yeah.
Why don't you go try that for a while?
I don't know. So then at 14, we got the Blue Jackets and Ristolainen, a defenseman from Finland. So
they could go anywhere, too.
My one big question on the draft, Buffalo at the 16th pick is slated to get, I looked at it wrong now, but it's Mirko Mueller.
Yes.
It looked to me like it was Micro Mueller. I wanted to know if that was Peter's little brother.
See, this is the sort of analysis I come to expect from you. Thanks.
If you spell it wrong, it's Micro Mueller.
That's true. I mean, if you spell some of these
Peter's
names
little
wrong,
brother, right?
You can get pretty much anything if you spell Rasmus Ristolainen wrong.
Yeah.
So that's just a quick look at the top 14. But, again, the main thing to take out of this draft, and I've heard a lot of GMs say this now, no matter where you're picking in the first round and even the first couple rounds, they expect to get impact players.
Yeah, and the other thing that we haven't really touched on, and because we could talk for hours about it, is the fact, because this draft is so deep and because these players are so valuable, I think this year you're going to see a lot of movement where in past years you haven't. Because there are impact players already coming up as free agents where a GM can say, I'll give you my pick if you give me your free agent type of deal. And deals like the trades are being made because the draft is so deep. I think we're going to see a lot of movement this year.
I want to win now.
Right.
So give me a free agent that you can't keep because the cap's coming down.
Right.
And we'll give you a pick. Look, to the point of Calgary rebuilding, they have 3 first-round picks. Mm-hmm. So everybody gets all over Calgary because they waited too long to rebuild, and that's probably true. I mean, they haven't been in the playoffs in a while. They were just kind of hanging out in the 10-11 spot, which does you no good. You're never getting Nail Yakupov or Taylor Hall or whatever. But of all the years to have 3 first-round picks, this was the year to do it by all accounts.
Right.
So, I mean, they've got Pittsburgh's pick there. If they can hit on all 3 of those first 3 picks, and it's 28, 22, and 6, That's a good foundation going forward.
But think about it. They don't have to actually hit on the picks. They might be able to get impact players now for those picks.
Yeah.
Because
they might be better off keeping them, though.
Oh, I agree.
And they're another team that could take a goalie because they don't have one now.
Nope.
So it's a good time to take a goalie. I guess they have some AHL talent. But NHL Draft tomorrow, and certainly something we'll be talking about a lot. I'll tell you what, I'm looking ahead to news and notes. There's a ton of stuff in news and notes.
You're tuned into the Hockey Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Hockey Podcast for even more hockey news.
# do it.
Final segment, news and notes here. Lots of stuff to talk about, Doug. How's that audio treating you over there?
Wow.
You told me to project and sit up, and that's what I was taught when I was going through broadcasting school. Broadcasting, that's still a thing, right? Broadcasting school?
Kleenex, I got some blood dripping down my ear here. Go ahead.
It's no pain, no gain. You're the Patrice Bergeron of podcasting.
Okay.
Before we get into free agency and 18,000 other things that we're going to try and cram into the next couple minutes here, all-rookie team was announced.
Oh, what do we got?
Well, and we have, starting the goal. I know that you like to work from the goal out. Jake Allen, St. Louis Blues. Probably a pretty good pick.
Good pick.
15-9, 2.46 goals against. Defense, Jonas Brodin, Minnesota.
Yep.
Justin Schultz, Edmonton. I think a lot of people thought he would be a big contributor. Get to the forwards. Brendan Gallagher, Montreal, had a very good year.
Yes, he did.
Kind of, I don't want to say out of nowhere, but compared to some of the other guys. Brandon Saad.
Yes.
I don't think this takes the playoffs into account, but he obviously had a very memorable rookie year. And Jonathan Huberdeau, who won Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
That's nice. Neil Yakupov was a rookie this year, right?
Yeah, I believe he was.
Okay. Am I missing something?
Yeah, where is he?
Again, let me just remind you of Neil Yakupov's numbers. Number 1 overall pick a year ago.
Yep.
17 goals. Leads all rookies. In fact, only 6 rookies even had double-digit goals. 14 assists, right near the top of all rookies, 31 points, tied for number 1 with Jonathan Huberdeau. So again, not on the all-rookie team. And, I mean, the 3 forwards they put on there were pretty good. So
wasn't a list of the finalists for the Rookie of the Year.
Wasn't even a finalist.
Yeah, I don't get it.
I'm just baffled. Whatever. On to
trade rumors.
Yeah, this is going to be a crazy summer. We've said this in the past, and it's already starting. So you threw a couple names out as we were going to air this. Go ahead and toss some of these out.
Well, your buddy, Mr. Seguin from the Boston Bruins, is on the block.
Yeah, I can't imagine why.
What do you mean, that 1 point in the playoffs?
one goal heading into that last game. I am actually a little surprised, though. I mean, this is a guy that was the number 2 pick 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Has been pretty good. So
he just didn't show up in the playoffs.
Yeah, so I'm a little surprised. I mean, these are rumors, so we don't know how true any of them are. But maybe this is just a case of Boston saying, if we can get 2 or 3 really good assets for him, we'll do it.
And then our buddy Corey Schneider. Vancouver's got him dangling in the wind.
That's interesting.
Oilers are looking at him, apparently.
But there's a few teams in Alberta that need a goalie. So,
Calgary.
The thing that I think is interesting about Corey Schneider potentially being on the move is this is something that we talked about, I think, on the very first episode of this podcast. There's so much talk about how we have to move Roberto Luongo for Vancouver, and we have to get rid of his giant $5.3 million contract that goes through pretty much 3,080. Like, they signed forever. Why not just trade Schneider? He's easier to move. $4 million a year for the next 2 years. $4 million a year for a goalie that could potentially be one of the best in the league. It's worth it.
I think it's worth it.
If you're Edmonton or you're Calgary, or I mean, there's other teams.
Well, there's other teams that'll scoop him up. So we'll see where he goes, but it doesn't surprise me.
I think he is in a better position to succeed in Edmonton, let's just say, than he is in Vancouver with Luongo looking over his shoulder the whole time.
Right. Well, I mean, that has to be broken up, and this is the easiest way to break that up.
And quick note on Sagan. This is research on the fly during the show.
Sure.
Boston doesn't have a first-round pick, so maybe that's why he's been
there you go.
Look at that, huh?
That's pretty
good.
Good.
As I was talking. I don't know if anything I said made sense, but as I was talking.
And then we got our buyouts. The big news that came down the other day.
Vinny Lecavalier is like the face of Tampa Bay hockey to me.
I saw it come across, and I'm like, excuse me?
The only way I can accept this, and Toronto is one of the teams that's been talked about to maybe get him. Their uniforms are so similar now that I could probably do that.
Yeah, that's like going to house track. I want the blue horse.
Yeah, that's how I would do it, a horse track. Ilya Brizgalov gets bought out. There's a shocker.
He was not performing. You got to bite that bullet. You got to move forward. You got to clear some cap space. Danny Briere's out there now. And, of course, earlier in the year, Thomas Caberlet, Steve Matador, and Rostislav Olez.
So, a couple names. Brizgalov is an interesting one to me. I mean, I guess everybody wins there because he's still getting paid $1.6 million a year for like the next 23 years. Yeah, so he's a big winner. And I really, Philadelphia doesn't win at all because they're paying him $1.6 million for the next 23 years. I love the quote from the GM that was like, yeah, it was a costly mistake. It's time to move on.
I like that quote.
Very costly, and I don't think he's the one paying him.
Yeah, no, he's not the one paying him, but it's a good quote. I mean, he had to do what he had to do for the betterment of the team. I mean, hey, I made a mistake, and now we've got to fix it. Now we've got to move forward. I don't have a problem with that. And if the owners and the people that are bankrolling the team don't have a problem with it, all is good. I mean, if you make a mistake and you own up to it, I think it's great.
No, that's true. You do have to. You can't just sit there and feel sorry for yourself or try and fit a square peg into a round hole if it's not going to work.
Right, and you're paying him one way or the other, and he's not helping the team, so you might as well do something. And they had to do what they had to do. That move did not surprise me. The Tampa Bay move, that surprised me. We'll see how it plays off down the road. I know there's a lot of teams that wouldn't mind Vinny LeCavier on their roster.
Well, yeah, now you look – last thing on Philadelphia, Corey Schneider would fit there too, and they have a lot of assets to trade.
Yes.
So, and he makes considerably less than Ilya Brizgalov makes. So you look at the top free agents out there, and all of a sudden Vinny LeCavier is right near the top of that list.
Well, I mean, he's at the top of the list. I mean, he's got the biggest cap hit at 7.7. But, I mean, you look at the top 5 of that list. You've got LeCavier, Iginla, Briere, Ilyash, Brizgalov, Tim Thomas. What's Tim Thomas's story?
Has anybody seen Tim Thomas in the last year?
No, I mean, he said he was going to take a year off.
Which he has now done.
He has done. But I haven't seen any news or any headlines or anything about him surfacing and coming back.
I mean, he's obviously not coming back to Boston. I have to think he knew that when he left. I mean, it's not like he was leaving with no backup goaltender. We knew Rask was going to be good. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing if you and me knew, then other people also knew.
Right.
And Tim Thomas saw him every day in practice. So I'm pretty sure he knew too. And Boston didn't seem to care when Tim Thomas left. So they obviously knew. If you're Tim Thomas, you're 39. It's such a weird thing to disappear for a year at that point in your career.
Yeah, that was a strange move.
He's made some strange moves in the last year and a half. Decisions, public announcements. But there's not many goalies out there. So if you're a team that didn't get Jonathan Bernier, and if you're a team that doesn't get Corey Schneider, there's maybe one potential good free agent goaltender that's out there, and he might not even be a free agent. So all of a sudden, Tim Thomas, there's a market for Tim Thomas.
Yeah. Well, maybe he was smart enough and looked ahead and saw it and figured he'd take a year off.
Yeah, or maybe he just got lucky.
Or he got lucky, one of the two.
But Daniel Alfredsson, got to mention him as well.
Yeah, he's going back to Ottawa, which I think is great for Ottawa.
It is. And this goes back to my earlier point on Ottawa. Now you have Alfredsson and Karlsson and Craig Anderson and Paul McLean. Corey Conacher, too.
Yep.
That's a solid team, and it's made better again by the fact that Paul McLean is such a good coach.
Yeah, now all they need is you got an 82-game schedule coming up. Everything won't be compacted. So if injuries do hit, it won't be as costly. So, I mean, and if that team stays healthy,
look out. Jason Spezza, we didn't even mention his name.
Yeah, we didn't even mention Spezza.
Because he wasn't on the team last year, basically. So, yeah, in a shortened 48 condensed schedule, they were still able to make the playoffs.
Right.
And win a round in the playoffs. So, yeah, and they've got money to spend. Although, as we just mentioned, there's not a lot of great free agents out there. Can we go into Penguins Corner here for a second? All right. Chris Letang. How much would you pay for Chris Letang? Per season.
5, 6.
Okay. He wants more than 7, apparently.
Oh, boy.
Offered 8 years at $56 million. Now, you know me. I do follow the Penguins closely. I don't know where they came up with this money. Because they've already signed Crosby and Malkin. Mm-hmm. Malkin this summer. Both those guys are getting paid very handsomely, but took less money to stay in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
That's kind of been something that Pittsburgh's had going for them, and Ray Shero's a great GM, but part of the reason he's doing so well is guys are taking less money to stay in Pittsburgh. Again, Crosby and Malkin are making a ton of money, but they could have got more elsewhere. Letang not willing to do that, which to me means he's getting traded.
Well, I think there's teams that are out there. I don't know if they're going to pay him what he thinks he's worth.
The thing is, though, we've mentioned this in the past. There's 3 teams in the NHL that are set on the blue line.
Right.
So there's so much desperation for a defenseman. And Chris Letang, his offensive numbers are inflated from playing with Crosby and Malkin and Kunitz and Dupuis and James Neal and Iginla for a little bit. And his numbers offensively are inflated, but he's still a very good defenseman. Somebody's going to want him. And somebody's going to probably even pay more than that.
And the Penguins have roughly $8 million of cap space.
They were going to give it all to him, basically. I mean, if you re-sign him, if you're Pittsburgh for that deal, you're obviously saying bye to Jerome Iginla. You're probably saying bye to James Neal. Probably saying bye to Pascal Dupuis, too. So at some point, if you're Pittsburgh and you're looking at it and you can say, we can have Chris Letang, who doesn't seem to want to be here. Maybe there's more to the story. Or we can have Dupuis and James Neal and then 3 assets we get in the trade for Letang. With draft picks in this draft, they don't have a first-round pick either. So, I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
He's a great player, man, but you're right. He's not going to have the supporting cast he had in Pittsburgh.
So, I mean, he wants to be paid like he's playing with Crosby and Malkin.
Right, which is why 8 years at $7 million is a pretty good deal.
I was surprised they offered that much to him, and I was surprised he turned it down. Dan Bilesma, coach of the Penguins. Now he's coach of Team USA.
That's great for the Olympics coming up this year.
Yeah.
I think he earned it.
I mean, he gets the job basically over John Tortorella, which could have made for a very interesting Olympics, and Peter Laviolette. Those are your 2 main competitors.
All great coaches. All great coaches. Either one of those 3 deserved to be on that bench.
I love the Dan Bilesma quote when somebody asked him, they're like, you have pretty limited international experience as far as coaching. He's like, no, I have none. So, USA.
It's hockey.
Yeah.
The rink's a little bit bigger in Europe, but that's about it.
Well, and he's going to be coaching against Crosby and Malkin. I'm pretty sure he knows those guys pretty well.
Yep.
You wanted to throw this out there?
I just thought it was weird.
It is weird.
Martin Brodeur is on the cover of EA Sports NHL 14. I know they did a fan vote, and I'm thinking to myself, there are so many big names in the game. How did Marty Brodeur? I'm not taking anything away from him as a player, man. He's a phenomenal goalie. But where's the Crosbys? Where's the Stamkoses? Where's the? You know what I'm saying?
I'm trying to get a list of the guys who have graced the cover of that game. That's obviously the preeminent.
Oh, and who
hockey
did he
game.
beat?
Sergei Bobrovsky. It's like all the goalies of America and Canada decided they were going to vote this year. Because, I mean, like you said, it was a fan vote. So it's a popularity contest. And
so the New Jersey fans and the Columbus fans stepped up, and the other 28 team fans stepped down.
I think it would have been great if a Columbus Blue Jacket was on the cover of the game. For as much as that team has just kind of been pushed aside.
They deserve it.
I'm looking at past covers. I don't see Datsuk. I don't see Crosby. I don't see Taves. Taves may have been on the cover. I know Stamkos is on the cover, but to your point, all these good young players that are up and coming that aren't on the cover. So.
No, Yakov.
Who? Is he still in the league? But Martin Brodeur is on the cover, and I believe he was in the league when the first ever EA Sports NHL game came out. Possibly when the first video game was ever invented. Wow. So there's your Martin Brodeur moment to wrap this up. Enjoy the draft, and we will be back next week. That's it for episode 12. Next week, we'll break down the winners and losers from the deepest draft in recent memory.
And we'll also take a look on how the free agency market is panning out. Episode 13 looks to be a must-listen.
For Doug Cannon, I'm Luke Lipinski. Thanks for listening to the Hockey Podcast.